crowds. You're looking at live video from Peru as the Pope makes his way into Lima. You can see the motorcade. So many people lined up to get a glimpse of this man who has such extraordinary star power, obviously a spiritual leader. He's on a mission in South America, and this is just one of his stops. It's pretty extraordinary. Earlier we saw him greet the president of Peru. There were some children there as well who were anxious to see Pope Francis. Really a pretty innovative Pope who's making some pretty dramatic changes within the Catholic Church. Again, you're watching live footage from Peru. Pope Francis has arrived, and this is his motorcade. Now, with us now to discuss this trip is Father Gregory Chisholm. Father, you've done a lot of work here in New York City. The significance of this particular trip, the Pope in South America, how would you categorize it?
Well, it's wonderful. It's actually a preparation for what will probably be a Pan-Amazon Synod that will be coming up in the Catholic Church in 2019. So he's kind of building the structure for that synod. And the synod, of course, is a gathering of bishops from the region, and they will all come to Rome and talk about some of the particular issues that are important. Those issues include things like the treatment of indigenous people.
We saw that huge. I mean, there were protests, there were some church burnings on contested land.
Exactly.
I mean, what a touchy issue. So,
it is. It's very sensitive.
What are you expecting?
Well, you know, I think to have the Pope bring attention to these concerns of indigenous communities is extremely important, because very often the governments in the areas that are attached to these communities aren't as sensitive, and they would rather everything go away almost, you know. And so the Pope being there and going into southern Chile and soon going into the Amazon region in Peru, that is going to change everything. I mean, it brings the attention. Here in the United States, we don't know a thing about the Mapuche people. You know, we don't get any news about it. We get a lot of news about the sexual abuse crisis, which is extremely important. But for the Chileans, a much more central issue to what's happening to their future is what happens to these indigenous people, you know, and similarly in Peru, and at least in around the Amazon regions of Peru.
Now, you mentioned those sexual abuse allegations of trauma and the controversy surrounding that. How do you think that he is addressing that? How do you think he is saying to people of faith in the Catholic community, welcome back? How is he doing it?
Well, for him, his solution is to go directly to the people who are victimized. I mean, his whole way of dealing with people on the margins is to go out to them. So he spent time in prisons, you know, he spent time with people who were victims of abuse. But beyond that, because he is in charge of a structure, a government structure within the church, and has control over the behavior of priests and bishops, I mean, he is attentive to bringing people to justice, you know, and making sure that if they're brought to justice, that they don't impact Catholics and Christians any longer, you know. So he's very concerned about those things. So
we noticed that there has been a dramatic shift. So when you go to Catholic churches in America, you see a lot more people of color. A lot of the priests, a lot of the nuns are actually not American.
Right.
As a man of color, who is a man of the cloth, how is that being reflected here in the New York congregations?
Yes, I find it refreshing. I really do. It's being reflected not only in the pews, but it's being reflected even in the Catholic schools. The limitation there is that Catholic schools are fee-paying organizations, and so you have to find the money to make sure that people of color who often don't have, you know, middle-class lives in the city of New York can afford to go to Catholic schools. But it's extremely important that that happen. You know, the history of what the Catholic Church can do to people who are working class and trying to make it into the American society is well known. You know, and it can happen, it can continue to happen, but it has to be kind of encouraged. Now, certainly in the churches, that is clearly, we encourage that entirely. So in Harlem, where I work, for instance, we have churches that reach out certainly to Hispanic peoples, but also to people who are French-speaking Africans, you know, and Haitian people, you know, so we have worship services that try to meet the needs. But beyond that, we're trying to get people connected to the Catholic school system. So
when I look at these live images of the Pope in Peru, it sends a message. There are so many thousands of miles away, but what is that supposed to tell the other people around the world who are watching this visit?
Oh, that the Pope cares so much about people who are marginalized and people of color. I mean, that's what it says. Look at his visits and his trips, you know? Look at where he's spending his time. Look at how he gets out of those Pope mobiles and goes and touches, you know, the people who are the real people, you know, the people who are on the ground. I just think he is a marvelous piece of fresh air, the best fresh air we've had in the Catholic Church since Vatican II.
Do you think that'll help bring people back to the church? We've seen declining numbers. We've seen churches close here in the USA.
Yeah, and those numbers decline legitimately, I think, you know, but the Pope is bringing back mercy into the conversation, you know, and that's so important in an era when people are getting into all sorts of difficulties and troubles, and they're all disconnected from one another. You know, our technology disconnects us seemingly rather than connects us. Mercy is going to be such an important feature of any way in which the church operates within the world.
Thank you so much, Father Chisholm.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate your insight. Mercy.
Yeah.